At my daughter's 7th birthday party, my mother carried in a silver box so large, Hazel had to stand on her toes to reach the ribbon. For one hopeful second, my little girl looked as if every cruel comment from the past year had been erased. She glanced at me, smiling, then lifted the lid while my parents called everyone closer. Inside the box was a single yellow pencil. It was not sharpened. There was no card, no sketchbook, and no hidden gift beneath the tissue paper. My father laughed first. My mother folded her arms and said, "That's all a child with no future deserves." The room erupted. My sister covered her mouth, pretending she was shocked, but I saw her shoulders shaking. Even relatives who had come only for cake laughed because my parents were laughing. Hazel stood frozen beside her birthday table, clutching the pencil with both hands. She had spent weeks telling everyone she wanted to design bridges when she grew up. Now she looked at me with tears filling her eyes and asked, "Is that true, Mommy?" I crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and pulled her against my chest. My phone vibrated inside my pocket. I read the message once, then again. Originality review complete. National broadcast begins in 90 seconds. I kissed Hazel's forehead and whispered, "Perfect timing." My mother's smile faltered. My sister stopped laughing. I connected my phone to the television just as a photograph of my nephew Mason appeared beside the bridge design everyone had praised him for creating. Then the gold winner banner vanished, and 4 words filled the screen. Winner status, suspended. My father turned toward me, suddenly pale. He still thought the stolen bridge was the only secret about to come out. Stay with me to discover what my family stole from my daughter, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about truth, courage, and quiet justice. The television had been the center of the party long before I touched it. My parents had arranged Hazel's birthday in the ballroom of their house, a room they normally used for North Star Learning Institute fundraisers. A blue and silver North Star logo covered the wall behind the cake. A photographer had spent more time positioning sponsors in front of it than taking pictures of Hazel. I had agreed to hold the party there because Hazel believed her grandparents wanted to make peace. We had kept our distance for months after my mother called her drawing habit a distraction from real learning. When Elaine offered the house, Hazel squeezed my hand and asked whether Grandma finally wanted to see her bridge sketches. I said perhaps she did. I wanted to believe it almost as much as my daughter. Camille made sure the afternoon belonged to North Star. My younger sister moved from table to table reminding guests that the national broadcast would feature a special segment about Mason's victory in the Young Builders Challenge. She called it a historic achievement for their family and for the Institute. Each time she said it, Hazel's cake, balloons, and 7th birthday seemed to shrink behind her. Mason stood near the television, in a navy jacket, looking uncomfortable every time someone praised him. He was 9, good with words, and trained by Camille to smile when a camera turned toward him. The bridge model in the competition photographs was elegant, with 2 curved supports and a small relief platform beneath the center span. I had seen that shape before, not on television, but across our kitchen table while Hazel explained how rescue workers could reach people trapped after a flood. Hazel had asked for only 2 things for her birthday: a large drawing pad and a set of professional colored pencils she had admired in the window of an art store. She did not care that they were made for older students. She loved the range of grays because, as she told me, bridges were never only gray. My mother knew that. She had asked Hazel twice what she wanted. That was why the silver box was not a careless joke. It had been wrapped slowly, displayed prominently, and carried into the room after Camille asked the photographer to prepare. Elaine called the sponsors closer. Victor lowered the music. They wanted witnesses. After the broadcast suspended Mason's title, the laughter died so completely that I could hear the soft clicking of the birthday candles burning behind me. Camille lunged for the remote and shut off the television. "What did you do?" I connected my phone. "You filed something against my son. I asked an independent committee to review evidence." My father stepped between us. Victor Mercer could make a room obey him without raising his voice. For 30 years, parents had trusted him to decide which children were gifted, which programs deserved funding, and which futures were worth investing in. Turn it off and remove whatever accusation you made. We have donors in this room. The broadcast is already over. You chose your daughter's birthday to humiliate this family. I looked down at Hazel. She was still holding the pencil, but the tears had stopped. Her face had gone still in the way it did when she was trying to solve something too painful to understand. I did not choose the broadcast time, I said. Someone else chose to celebrate a stolen project during her birthday. A murmur moved through the guests. Several people avoided my eyes. Others looked toward the door, but no one left. Curiosity was stronger than loyalty. Camille's face tightened. Mason built that bridge. The judges verified his work. Mason did not defend himself. He looked at Hazel, then at the pencil in her hand. When Camille touched his shoulder, he flinched. That small movement frightened me more than my father's anger. Elaine recovered first. She gave the room the gentle smile she used in North Star advertisements. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding. Leah has always been emotional where Hazel is concerned. The child failed our entrance assessment last year, and her mother has never accepted the result. Hazel pressed closer to me. My father added, "A child who cannot complete basic reading instructions did not design a national award winner." There it was. The real purpose of the pencil. They had not simply wanted to insult Hazel. They wanted everyone in the room to accept that she was incapable of creating anything worth stealing. I took the pencil from her hand and slipped it into my bag. "We are leaving." Camille blocked the doorway. "You are not taking this story outside. This is not your story. It affects Mason. It started with Hazel." For a moment, Mason seemed ready to speak. His mouth opened, but Camille gripped his shoulder and he looked down. I did not blame him. He was a child standing inside a machine built by adults. I led Hazel toward the hall. Behind us, Victor ordered the photographer to stop recording. Elaine told the guests the review would be reversed by morning. Camille called someone from North Star's legal team. The party dissolved into frightened whispers before the cake was cut. Hazel did not cry until we reached the coat room. I crouched beside her and asked for her sketchbook. She always carried it in the purple backpack with the broken zipper, because she said ideas arrived without appointments. "I want to show them the first bridge," she whispered. "The one with the little bird underneath. Then they will know." I opened the book. Pages of towers, tunnels, and impossible cities moved beneath my fingers. Near the middle, the binding suddenly loosened. A torn edge ran close to the spine. One page was missing. Hazel stared at the gap. "That was it. Are you sure?" She nodded. "Grandma asked to see it when we came in. She said she wanted to put one of my drawings near the cake." My mother had returned the sketchbook less than 10 minutes later. I remembered because Hazel had asked whether Grandma liked the bridge, and Elaine had said she had not found anything worth displaying. I looked at the torn fibers. The page had not fallen out. Someone had removed it carefully, close enough to the binding to hide what was gone until we searched for it. The committee had suspended Mason's title because I had already sent photographs, classroom notes, and an early video of Hazel building the model. Those records were enough to raise questions, but the missing page was the clearest original design, dated months before North Star entered the competition. From the ballroom, I heard my father call my name. I closed the sketchbook and put it inside my coat. The people in that house had known exactly which page mattered, and someone had torn it out before placing a pencil in my daughter's hands and telling her she had no future. 8 weeks before Hazel's birthday, I stood outside her classroom and watched her turn a broken cereal box into something no adult in the room had imagined. Her second-grade class had been given a simple assignment. Each child had to design an object that could help the community during the rainy season. Most of the students chose umbrellas, waterproof backpacks, or machines that collected rainwater. Hazel chose a bridge. She sat on the carpet with wooden craft sticks spread around her knees, a shoelace looped between her fingers, and 3 pieces of cardboard folded into uneven rectangles. Her teacher, Nora Bell, crouched beside her and asked what she was building. "A bridge people can carry," Hazel said. "Sometimes the roads disappear when the water comes. Big bridges take too long, so this one rides in a little truck and opens when it gets there." Nora did not correct her language or ask her to write a paragraph first. She handed Hazel another piece of cardboard and asked her to show how the bridge would open. That was one reason Hazel trusted her. Nora understood that my daughter often saw the answer before she could find the words to explain it. Reading required effort. Spelling made her anxious. But when she looked at shapes, distances, and moving parts, her mind seemed to work faster than the rest of the world. Hazel bent 2 strips of cardboard into curved supports, then connected them with wooden sticks. Her first version collapsed as soon as she placed a toy car on it. She frowned, studied the broken joint, and moved one of the supports closer to the center. The second version leaned badly to one side. The third stayed upright, but the folding section would not close. I expected her to become frustrated. Instead, she pulled the shoelace through 2 holes and created a flexible hinge. When one leg of the bridge cracked near the base, she added a triangular piece of cardboard over it. "That part looks different," Nora said. "It broke," Hazel replied. "But if I make the other side the same, it gets stronger." She added a matching triangle and tested the bridge again. This time, the toy car crossed, without the structure bending. Nora took photographs throughout the lesson. She captured the empty cereal box, the failed versions, the cracked support, and the finished model. She also recorded a short video of Hazel explaining why the bridge folded. Hazel held the model close to the camera and spoke slowly. "The triangles help it stand. The ropes help it open. There is a little place underneath where rescuers can stop if someone is stuck in the water." She turned the bridge over and drew a tiny bird beneath the center platform. It was the same round bird she placed beside her name on nearly every drawing. Nora uploaded the photos and video to the classroom portal that afternoon. The system automatically recorded the date and time. At that moment, neither of us understood how important those ordinary classroom records would become. Hazel spent the following week improving the model at our kitchen table. She replaced the shoelace with elastic cord, painted the supports blue, and made a small truck from a matchbox to demonstrate how the folded bridge could be transported. She talked about it during breakfast, in the car, and while brushing her teeth. She called it the Fold Bridge because she wanted a name she could spell without help. That Friday, we took the model to dinner at my parents' house. I did not intend to show it to anyone. Hazel carried it inside because she was afraid leaving it in the car might damage the supports. Mason noticed it before we reached the dining room. "What is that?" he asked. "My emergency bridge." He knelt beside her, genuinely interested. Hazel showed him how the sides folded inward and how the small platform rested beneath the center span. Mason asked what would happen if the water moved too quickly. Hazel explained that heavier supports could be pushed into the ground. He suggested adding lights so rescuers could use it at night. For 20 minutes, they sat together on the living room floor, improving the idea without arguing over who was smarter. Hazel drew lights along the railing, while Mason held the model steady. Watching them, I remembered that the cruelty in our family had not begun with the children. Camille entered carrying a glass of wine, and stopped when she saw them. "That is impressive," she said. Hazel beamed. Praise from Camille was rare enough to feel important. Camille lifted the bridge and examined the folding joints. "A friend of mine works with STEM programs. Let me take this for a day. She might have suggestions." "It has to be at school Monday," I said. "Hazel can show her photographs instead." Camille's smile tightened. "I am trying to help." "I know, but the model stays with Hazel." She placed it back on the table, though not before taking several pictures with her phone. During dinner, my father began questioning me about Hazel's reading support. He believed Nora was encouraging Hazel to avoid her weaknesses rather than correcting them. She needs structure, Victor said. Building toys will not help when she cannot finish a timed assessment. It is not a toy, Hazel murmured. He continued talking as though she had not spoken. Victor pulled me into his office after dessert and showed me a brochure for an intensive reading program at North Star. He insisted Hazel needed to spend her summer there. I told him she already had a qualified specialist and that forcing her through another timed program would make her anxiety worse. While we argued, Elaine stayed with Hazel in the living room. When I returned, my mother was holding Hazel's sketchbook. She turned one page slowly, then another, while her phone rested beside her. "What are you doing?" I asked. Looking at her drawings. Hazel stood near the sofa, twisting her fingers together. Elaine closed the book and handed it back. "There is imagination here. She simply needs to learn that imagination without discipline does not become anything useful." Hazel placed the sketchbook into her backpack without answering. The next morning, we prepared to leave for the library so she could finish the written section of her assignment. When Hazel opened her project bag, the bridge was gone. We searched the car, the entryway, and every room she had entered after returning home. I called my parents. Elaine said she had seen Hazel carrying the project toward the door. Victor suggested my daughter had forgotten where she placed it. Camille told me children lost things all the time. Hazel became increasingly certain that the mistake was hers. "Maybe I left it under Grandma's table," she said. "I checked there. Maybe I dropped it outside. You carried the bag to the car." Her face crumpled. "Then maybe I forgot and only thought I did. I found an old photograph on my phone and helped her rebuild the model before Monday. It was not identical, but Nora accepted it with the original classroom records." Hazel received full credit, though she stopped talking about entering the idea in the district invention fair. 2 weeks later, Camille sent a North Star promotional video to our family group chat. The message read, "Mason is going national." I opened the video while Hazel sat beside me doing her reading exercises. Mason appeared inside North Star's media studio, standing behind a polished model of a portable rescue bridge. The supports were made from lightweight metal instead of cardboard. The elastic cord had been replaced by a mechanical hinge. Small emergency lights ran along the railings. Camille's voice introduced him as the youngest finalist in the National Young Builders Challenge. For several seconds, I tried to convince myself that the resemblance was not enough. Folding bridges existed. Triangular supports were common. Children could reach similar ideas. Then the camera moved beneath the center span. The same uneven reinforcement Hazel had created after her first model cracked appeared at both legs of Mason's bridge. Beneath the rescue platform was a tiny engraved bird. I paused the video. Hazel saw it and lowered her eyes. "That is your bird," I said. She did not answer. "Hazel, did Mason take your idea?" "No." Her reply came too quickly. "Did someone tell you not to talk about it?" She pushed her worksheet away. "I do not want him to lose." "Lose what?" She pressed both hands against her mouth, as if the truth might escape without permission. I called Camille. She insisted Mason had designed the bridge during a North Star Innovation workshop. When I mentioned the reinforcement and the bird, she laughed. Children copy symbols from one another. Hazel should be proud that she inspired him. Inspired him? I did not say she did. I said children share ideas. Elaine called minutes later. She told me not to turn Hazel's disappointment into jealousy and warned that accusing Mason could damage his confidence before the final judging. By evening, I had begun wondering whether they were right. That was what my family had trained me to do. Whenever their explanation contradicted what I could see, I questioned my own eyes first. At 11:30 that night, an unfamiliar email appeared in my inbox. The sender introduced himself as Caleb Ross, a former technology manager at North Star. His message contained only 3 sentences. "I saw the promotional video. The bridge is not the first student project North Star has reassigned. Before you confront anyone, download the attached image and preserve the original file." I opened the attachment. It was a screenshot from North Star's competition portal. Mason's official submission was listed beside Camille's account, Elaine's approval code, and a creation history dated 3 days after our family dinner. At the bottom of the screen was the original file name: Hazel, Foldbridge, Final. I did not call Caleb Ross immediately. I downloaded the screenshot, saved copies in 3 different places, and forwarded the original email to an account my family did not know existed. Only then did I reply and ask where he had obtained the file. His answer came less than 5 minutes later. I managed North Star's student database for 6 years. That file name should have been deleted before the competition entry was submitted. I stared at the message until the words stopped looking like words. The file had not merely resembled Hazel's project. Someone at North Star had uploaded her work, renamed it, and entered it under Mason's account. I asked Caleb to meet me the following morning at the downtown public library. I chose a table near the main desk, where cameras covered every entrance and anyone approaching us would be visible. My family had never been physically violent, but Victor controlled a respected institution. Elaine knew judges and donors across the state, and Camille treated every disagreement like a threat to her future. I was no longer willing to assume they would behave reasonably. Caleb arrived with an old laptop and a paper folder. He was in his early 40s, with tired eyes and the careful manner of someone who had spent years learning which truths could cost him his job. "Before I show you anything, I need to know what you want," he said. "I want to prove the bridge belongs to Hazel. That is the smallest part of what you are about to see." He opened the laptop and showed me a series of system logs. Hazel's original file had entered North Star's server 3 days after our family dinner. Elaine's administrator code approved the upload. Camille then copied the file into a private competition folder assigned to Mason. The dates were clear. So were the names. Mason's account showed no sketches, drafts, failed models, or early notes. His first recorded activity began after Hazel's project had already been uploaded. A North Star design coach created the polished diagrams. A contracted engineer replaced the cardboard joints with mechanical hinges. Camille prepared the explanation Mason later gave to the judges. "Did Mason know?" I asked. Caleb leaned back. "I cannot tell you exactly what he understood. I heard him ask why the bird was under the bridge. Camille said it was a family symbol. He asked whether he was supposed to say he drew it. She told him not to complicate things." I closed my eyes. Mason had looked afraid at the birthday party because he knew something was wrong, even if he had not known how much had been stolen. Caleb opened another folder. It contained dozens of student projects, each labeled with a number instead of a name. Some were simple classroom ideas. Others included working models, handwritten notes, and videos of children explaining concepts in their own words. "What is this?" I asked. North Star calls it the Development Library. Teachers and evaluators are encouraged to scan promising work. Officially, it is for curriculum research. And unofficially? If the child does not fit the image North Star wants, the idea can be reassigned. I looked at him, waiting for him to tell me I had misunderstood. He did not. The Institute had built a system around finding bright children whose families lacked money, influence, or the confidence to challenge a prestigious school. North Star offered free assessments, workshops, and community programs. Staff members photographed projects and collected written work. The most marketable ideas were then moved into private programs, where selected students were coached to present them at competitions. The original child was told the idea lacked structure, had already been attempted, or was not advanced enough to continue. The children chosen to present usually have parents who donate, attract publicity, or help the institute, Caleb said. The children who create the first version are often the easiest to silence. Hazel had not been chosen because North Star considered her difficult to market. She read slowly, disliked cameras, and needed time to explain her thoughts. Mason spoke clearly, followed scripts, and was the grandson of North Star's founders. My parents had not believed he created the better project. They had decided he was the better child to display. I asked Caleb why he had waited until now. My contract included a confidentiality agreement. When I questioned the records, Victor said the institute owned everything created during its programs. Then my access was restricted. That does not explain why you kept copies. His expression changed. My daughter attended a free North Star workshop. She has auditory processing difficulties, but she is gifted in mechanical reasoning. They used one of her designs in a donor presentation after rejecting her scholarship application. He had complained. 2 weeks later, he was dismissed for allegedly mishandling private data. He had spent the past year trying to find a parent willing to challenge the institute without allowing North Star to bury the case quietly. Then he saw Mason's bridge on television and recognized Hazel's file name in the upload history. Caleb placed the paper folder in front of me. Inside was Hazel's North Star entrance assessment from the previous year. I had seen the final version. It described her as below average in reading speed, inconsistent in verbal recall, and unlikely to succeed in an accelerated innovation program. Victor had used that report every time I defended her abilities. The document Caleb gave me looked different. Hazel's original results placed her in the 98th percentile for spatial reasoning and the 96th percentile for visual problem solving. The evaluator had recommended a modified assessment without a reading timer. 14 minutes after the report was submitted, Elaine opened the file and removed those recommendations. She also deleted the 2 highest scores. The final summary called Hazel's potential limited. I remembered the night I received that report. Hazel had asked why Grandpa's school did not want her. I told her every child had different strengths, then spent the following weeks making her practice reading longer because I believed the assessment proved she was falling behind. My parents had altered the report, and I had unknowingly helped them make her feel defective. "I need some air," I said. Outside the library, I stood beneath the front awning while rain darkened the sidewalk. Caleb waited several feet away and did not try to speak until I turned back. "Can North Star erase these records now?" "They can try. The competition platform keeps independent logs, and I preserved copies before I lost access. But once your family knows what you have, they will attack your credibility. They already started. They will say you are angry because Hazel failed the assessment. They may also claim that anything she created at North Star belongs to the institute. She designed the bridge at school and at home. Then her teacher's records matter. So does every photograph with an original date." I called Nora before leaving the library. She remembered the project clearly and confirmed that the classroom portal still held the photographs and video. I asked her not to send anything through my usual email. She did not ask why. She only said she would preserve the entire class record. When Hazel came home that afternoon, she placed her backpack beside the sofa and went directly to the kitchen table. She usually began drawing before removing her coat. This time, she opened a reading workbook. "You do not have to finish that tonight," I said. "Grandma said I should practice instead of making things." "When did she say that?" "At their house. She said Mason needed the bridge because he could explain it right. She said if I told people it was mine, they would think I was jealous." My hands tightened around the back of the chair. "Did she ask you to give her the drawing?" Hazel shook her head. "She said she only wanted to show Grandpa. Then she told me Mason might win enough money to help lots of children. I did not want to ruin that." "You did not ruin anything. But he looked sad at my party." I sat beside her. "Mason is not responsible for what the adults chose. Neither are you. Your idea still belongs to you, even if someone else was taught how to describe it." She looked toward her backpack. "Will everyone see my video?" "Only if you agree. I will not use your work without asking you." That promise mattered because every adult around her had treated her creations as something they could take, judge, or trade. I wanted her to understand that protecting her future also meant respecting her choices. She thought for a moment, then nodded. "You can show the part where the bridge breaks. I want them to know I fixed it." That evening, Caleb sent me one final encrypted folder. Its label read, Founder's Archive. Inside was a scanned drawing dated 26 years earlier. It showed a mobile learning room designed to bring books and science equipment to children who could not travel to private schools. At the bottom of the page, written in my 12-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Every child should get a place to show what they can do." North Star had used the same idea in its founding campaign. The brochure credited Camille. The drawing on my screen was 26 years old, but I remembered every line. I had been 12 when I designed a mobile classroom inside an old school bus. The walls folded into desks. The shelves locked before the bus moved. A ramp allowed children with disabilities to enter without help. I drew it after learning that some students lived too far from a library to visit one regularly. My father praised it at dinner. My mother asked to borrow it for a meeting with local education donors. A few weeks later, she told me the idea had been too impractical to use. The North Star founding brochure told another story. It showed Camille, 7 years old, standing beside a polished version of my drawing. The caption called her the young visionary, whose compassion inspired the Institute. North Star had built its public identity on an idea taken from me before I was old enough to understand what credit meant. I called Margaret Shaw, my former 6th-grade teacher. She remembered the project immediately. "You won the Community Innovation Award," she told me. "I never received an award. Your parents collected it. Your mother said you were sick." Margaret still had photographs from the district showcase. One showed me standing beside the original bus design. Another showed Elaine holding my certificate while Victor spoke to the judges. The photographs were dated 6 months before North Star announced its first mobile education campaign. When I showed the records to Caleb, he was not surprised. "Hazel was not the beginning," he said. "Your parents turned the method into an institution." I already understood the method. North Star gathered projects through free assessments and community workshops. When an idea came from a child who lacked money, confidence, or influential parents, the Institute could move it into a private development program. A more marketable student would later present the polished version. The child who created it was told the work was incomplete or not original enough to continue. Caleb and I reviewed the files carefully. I refused to expose medical records or private school reports. We selected only cases with a clear original creator, a documented transfer, and a later competition or donor presentation under another child's name. The strongest case belonged to a 12-year-old named Eli Navarro. Eli had designed an inexpensive irrigation timer during a free North Star workshop. His family was told the idea had no practical future. 8 months later, a donor's daughter won a regional sustainability prize with a refined version of the same device. I met Eli's mother, Denise, at a diner outside the city. She brought his early sketches, photographs, receipts for components, and a letter from North Star claiming the Institute could use projects created during its programs. "They did not only take the machine," Denise said. "They convinced him he had copied someone else. He stopped building after that." Her words stayed with me because I had seen the same change in Hazel. My daughter once filled every empty piece of paper with towers and bridges. After Mason's video appeared, she spent more time correcting spelling exercises than drawing. The theft was not limited to a prize. It changed what a child believed he was allowed to become. Denise agreed to preserve the evidence, but would not allow Eli's name to be released without his permission. I promised the same protection to Hazel. I wanted the truth exposed, but I would not repeat North Star's habit of treating children's work and identities as property. That evening, I submitted a formal challenge to the National Young Builders Challenge. I sent Nora's classroom photographs, Hazel's explanation video, the creation dates, and the competition log containing her original file name. I kept the broader North Star evidence separate. Mason's case needed to be decided on Hazel's work alone. Camille received the notification within an hour. "You filed a complaint against a 9-year-old, she said when I answered. I challenged an entry created by adults and submitted under his name. Mason has worked for months. He learned how to present the bridge. Hazel designed it." Camille lowered her voice and offered a settlement. North Star would publicly call Hazel an early contributor. She would receive a certificate, a place in the summer program, and a $5,000 education grant. Mason would remain the official inventor. They wanted to convert theft into collaboration without surrendering the title, the scholarship, or the publicity. "No," I said. "You are willing to damage Mason over a name? The name is the truth. The competition prize could change his life." The project already changed Hazel's life. She stopped believing her own ideas belonged to her. Camille warned me that North Star's annual funding review was approaching. If the controversy frightened donors, free programs could close, and employees could lose their jobs. My family had always used other people's dependents as protection. They presented every dishonest choice as a sacrifice necessary to preserve something larger. "If North Star can survive only by erasing children," I said, "then the problem is not my complaint." Before ending the call, I asked Camille about the mobile classroom. She was silent long enough to answer without speaking. "Mom told me you gave the idea to the family," she finally said. "I was 12. She said you lost interest. Did you know the brochure credited you?" I knew later. That was the line separating the child Camille had been from the adult she had chosen to become. She had not been responsible when our parents placed her beside my drawing. But she had learned the truth and continued accepting the story because it protected her place in the family. Hazel was at the kitchen table when the call ended. She had drawn a new version of the rescue bridge with separate lanes for emergency vehicles and pedestrians. "Will Mason hate me?" she asked. "He may feel angry or embarrassed, but none of this is your fault. Can he still invent something?" "Yes. He needs the chance to make something that is truly his." Hazel nodded and returned to the drawing. Her answer reminded me that the children were not the enemies in this story. The adults had taught one child to surrender credit and another to accept it. My phone vibrated shortly before midnight. Caleb had recovered an audio recording from a closed North Star meeting held after Hazel's entrance assessment. Victor's voice came first. "She has ability, but donors need a child they can believe in." Elaine replied that Hazel was too hesitant, too difficult to present, and unlikely to inspire investment. She instructed the staff to remove the highest spatial reasoning scores from the final report. Then Camille spoke. "Move her strongest work into the development files. Mason can use it when he is ready." A pause followed before she added one final instruction. "Make sure Leah never sees the original results." I replayed the recording once, not because I had misunderstood it, but because part of me still wanted to believe my sister had only benefited from our parents' choices. She had not. Camille had helped select Hazel as the next child, whose talent could be taken, renamed, and sold back to the public under someone else's future. After hearing Camille's voice on the recording, I wanted to drive straight to North Star and demand answers. I wanted Victor, Elaine, and my sister to look me in the eye while I played every word back to them. Instead, I turned off my phone and watched Hazel draw at the kitchen table. Confronting my family would make me feel less helpless, but it could also warn them before Dana finished reviewing the evidence. More importantly, Hazel had already spent weeks carrying a secret that belonged to the adults around her. I needed to understand what had happened without making her feel as though she were being questioned for evidence. The following evening, I placed 2 sketch pads and a box of colored pencils on the floor beside her. I drew a crooked house, while Hazel designed a train station with a glass roof. We worked quietly until she relaxed enough to stop watching my face. "I need to tell you something important," I said. "When someone does something wrong, telling the truth does not cause the damage. The person who made the wrong choice caused it." Hazel shaded one of the station windows. "Even if people get mad? Even then, what if everyone stops being a family?" My pencil stopped moving. That was the choice my parents had placed in front of a 7-year-old. She could protect her own work, or she could keep the family that had already decided she was disposable. "You will always have a family with me," I said. "You never have to protect an adult by keeping a secret that hurts you." Hazel stared at her drawing for several seconds before speaking. She told me Elaine had taken the bridge model after our family dinner. My mother said Mason had a rare opportunity to appear on television and that he needed a project people could understand immediately. She promised the model would be returned before Nora graded it. When Hazel asked why Mason could not build his own project, Elaine told her that some children were better at ideas, while others were better at turning those ideas into a future. She said Hazel should feel proud that something she made could help her cousin succeed. Then came the threat, hidden inside the lesson. Elaine warned that if Hazel told me the competition might remove Mason, Camille could lose her job, and the family would blame us. She said Victor was already disappointed in me and might decide it was easier if we stopped visiting. Hazel had believed silence was the price of keeping her grandparents. I thought if Mason won, everybody would be happy again, she whispered. I put down my pencil and held her, but I did not tell her everything was fine. It was not fine, and pretending otherwise would only teach her the same lesson again. You were never responsible for keeping the adults happy, I said. Grandma should never have asked you to choose between your idea and your family. Hazel wiped her face against my shoulder. Mason said he was sorry. I pulled back. When? After the television practice. He said he did not know they were going to call him the inventor. He thought he was only showing the bridge because he talked louder than me. She explained that Mason had tried to return the model before the promotional recording. Camille stopped him and told him Hazel had agreed to share it. When he asked Hazel directly, Elaine entered the room before she could answer. Mason had not created the lie, but he had learned to stand inside it. He was old enough to understand that the praise did not belong entirely to him, yet young enough to fear what would happen if he contradicted his mother. I asked Hazel about the missing page in her sketchbook. She remembered Elaine admiring the first bridge drawing during the birthday party. My mother said she wanted to frame it as a surprise. Hazel allowed her to take the sketchbook into the study. When it was returned, she did not notice the page had been removed. I still have the little one, she said. She went upstairs and returned, carrying the wooden dollhouse Aaron had built for her. She opened the roof and reached into the smallest bedroom. Beneath a miniature bed was a folded paper model, no larger than my hand. It was the first version of the bridge mechanism. Hazel had made it from an index card, tape, and 2 pieces of elastic thread. One support was colored blue, the other green because she had run out of blue marker. Beneath the center fold was the same round bird. On the inside, she had written the date with the month and day reversed. I hid it after the big bridge disappeared, she said. I thought Grandma might need this one too. Those words hurt more than the birthday insult. My daughter had learned to hide her own creations inside a dollhouse because she did not trust her family to leave them in her hands. I photographed the model from every angle, but I did not take it from her. Nora confirmed by phone that Hazel had shown the paper version during the first classroom lesson. The teacher's notes even mentioned the mismatched colors and the fold that would not close properly. Dana agreed that the model could become important physical evidence. She arranged for an independent examiner to document it at our home, so Hazel would not have to surrender it to the competition. The next morning, a message appeared in Hazel's school account from Mason. He had used a library computer because Camille had begun checking his phone. I am sorry, he wrote. I knew it was your bridge when Mom made me practice the speech. Grandma said you wanted me to have it. I did not believe her after your party. Attached was a 23-second video. The recording was unsteady and partly blocked by the edge of a chair. Mason appeared to have activated the camera accidentally during a North Star practice session. Elaine stood beside the polished bridge, holding the page torn from Hazel's sketchbook. Camille removed a label from the base and replaced it with one bearing Mason's name. Mason's voice came from behind the camera. What if Hazel asks for it back? Camille did not look up. She will not. She knows who has the better chance of winning. Elaine folded the original drawing and placed it inside a black portfolio. The video ended before showing where she took it, but it proved the adults had possessed Hazel's page and knowingly changed the project's identity. My first instinct was to release the recording before North Star could create another explanation. Dana stopped me. "Mason is a child," she said. "If this goes online, he loses control of his image and his testimony. Preserve it, but do not turn him into public evidence." She was right. My family had already used both children as promotional material. I would not expose Mason to punish Camille. Dana arranged a confidential interview with Mason, a child advocate, and an investigator who had no connection to North Star. Camille would be informed because she was his legal guardian, but she would not be allowed to answer for him. Through Dana, I sent Mason a short message. I told him he was not responsible for the choices adults had made before he understood them. I also told him that knowing the truth gave him a responsibility to stop repeating the lie. Hazel asked whether Mason would lose his trophy. "Probably," I said. "Will he hate me?" "He might be angry for a while, but losing something that was never truly his is not the same as having it stolen." That afternoon, Camille discovered the school message. She confiscated Mason's devices, canceled the confidential interview, and posted a long statement on North Star's public page. She claimed I was pressuring a 9-year-old boy, manipulating private recordings, and using Hazel's disappointment to attack a successful educational institution. She described the bridge as a family collaboration and accused me of trying to steal Mason's achievement because I had never recovered from Aaron's death. Within an hour, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Parents I had never met called me jealous, unstable, and cruel. Some said Hazel needed to learn that not every child could be special. Others praised Camille for protecting her son from a bitter aunt. I closed the page before Hazel could see it, but the story was already moving beyond our family. For the first time, my parents were no longer trying to erase my daughter's work in private. They were asking the public to help them erase her name. By the next morning, Camille's statement had become more powerful than the truth because it was easier to understand. Her version had a grieving widow who could not accept her daughter's limitations, a jealous little girl who wanted her cousin's prize, and a respected school being attacked by an unstable family member. There were no altered assessments, stolen files, or adults teaching a child to claim someone else's work. Camille had removed every fact that made her responsible. Dana told me not to answer the comments. "Anything you post will be separated from context and used against you," she said. "Let the records speak where records matter." Staying silent felt unbearable until Hazel came downstairs carrying her backpack. She had slept badly and asked whether she still had to attend school. I told her she did not have to hide because adults had lied, but I also promised she could come home whenever she needed. Nora called before lunch. 2 students had shown Hazel Camille's post during recess. One said Mason was the real inventor because television would not feature someone who had stolen an idea. Another asked why Hazel wanted to ruin North Star when it helped poor children. Nora found her sitting beneath the climbing frame, drawing the same bridge repeatedly and crossing her own name out beneath each version. I drove to the school immediately. Hazel did not speak until we were inside the car. She placed the folded drawing on her lap and traced the dark lines where she had erased herself. "Maybe they should keep it," she said. "Why?" "Because everyone believes them." I wanted to tell her belief did not change ownership. I wanted to promise that truth always won, but children deserved more honesty than comforting lies. "Some people believe the first story they hear," I said. "That does not make it true. We are going to prove what happened, but you do not have to carry the argument for me. Can I stop drawing bridges? You can draw anything you choose. You can also stop for a while. What they cannot do is make that choice for you." When we arrived home, a courier was waiting at the door with a letter from North Star's attorneys. The institute demanded that I withdraw the competition challenge, surrender copies of internal records, and stop claiming that Hazel owned the design. Their strongest argument was a consent form supposedly signed when Hazel completed her entrance assessment. According to the letter, I had granted North Star permanent rights to use, modify, and publish anything she created through its programs. I knew I had never agreed to those terms. Dana requested the original electronic record. North Star sent a scanned form bearing my name, a typed signature, and an approval timestamp from a Saturday morning when Hazel and I had been attending Aaron's memorial service 3 counties away. The emergency contact listed on the form was Elaine. The email address used to approve it also belonged to my mother. They did not only alter Hazel's results, Dana said. Someone impersonated you to obtain control over her work. North Star's legal threat had given us evidence we did not previously know existed. Dana responded with a formal preservation notice. North Star was instructed not to delete emails, security footage, student submissions, access logs, consent records, or competition materials. Copies of the notice went to the competition committee, the state education department, and the charitable foundation that provided nearly a third of North Star's annual funding. That afternoon, the foundation announced it was pausing its upcoming grant review until an independent examination could be completed. Victor called before the announcement had been public for 10 minutes. "You have endangered 400 students," he said. "No. The people who forged my consent endangered them. You are making accusations you cannot prove. I have the form. Your mother completed paperwork because you were overwhelmed after Aaron died. She was helping you. She pretended to be me. She acted in Hazel's best interest." I looked at my daughter's crossed-out name on the kitchen counter. No one who acts in a child's best interest needs to erase her scores, steal her project, and tell her to remain silent. Victor's tone changed. The anger disappeared, replaced by the patient voice he had used when I was a child, and he wanted me to doubt myself. "Leah, your grief made you suspicious. Camille is trying to protect Mason. Elaine is trying to protect the Institute. I am trying to protect everyone, including you. You are protecting a system that requires one child to disappear so another can look exceptional." He warned me that the Foundation's suspended grant could close North Star's free community programs. Staff members might lose their jobs. Families who depended on scholarships would blame Hazel when the truth became public. I ended the call before he could place that burden on her again. An hour later, I received a message from someone named Owen Brooks. He introduced himself as Mason's father. Camille rarely mentioned him. She told the family he lived overseas and had little interest in raising his son. According to Owen, that was another carefully managed story. He worked on engineering projects abroad, but shared legal custody of Mason. Camille had stopped sending him school information after he questioned why North Star placed their son in promotional campaigns. He had seen Camille's public statement and contacted Mason through his school. Mason says he did not invent the bridge. Owen told me when we spoke. He says his mother will not let him talk to the investigators. I asked whether he believed his son. "I believe he is terrified." Owen forwarded their messages. Mason had written that Camille took away his devices and instructed him to say Hazel gave him the idea. Elaine had told him that admitting the truth would destroy North Star and leave hundreds of children without a school. The same adults who claimed to protect him were teaching him that honesty was an act of destruction. Because Owen shared legal custody, he could authorize the confidential interview Camille had canceled. Dana arranged for it to take place with a child advocate present. Neither Camille nor I would attend. I told Owen that I did not want Mason publicly blamed. "Neither do I," he said. "But protecting him cannot mean forcing him to live inside their lie." The interview took place the following morning. We received only a brief summary because Mason's full statement was protected. He confirmed that Camille gave him Hazel's bridge and told him it had been developed by North Star. He admitted knowing the design was Hazel's after seeing the bird beneath the platform. He also described a black portfolio Elaine kept inside the founder's conference room. According to Mason, it contained original drawings from children whose projects were later reassigned. Elaine called it the source archive and warned him never to open it. Dana immediately added the portfolio to the preservation request. North Star's attorneys replied that no such archive existed. Caleb called me less than an hour later. His former administrator account was no longer active, but a backup alert had been connected to his personal email years earlier. Someone inside North Star had begun deleting files from the development library. The deletion started 12 minutes after Mason's interview ended. Dana contacted the state investigator and requested emergency access before more evidence disappeared. North Star refused entry, claiming the servers contained confidential student information. By evening, an order had been issued, requiring the institute to preserve its systems under outside supervision. Victor was no longer permitted to control which files the investigators could inspect. The next morning, 2 state examiners entered North Star with an independent technology team. Camille stood outside, telling reporters that the review would clear the family. Elaine remained inside the founder's conference room until an investigator asked her to surrender the keys. They found the black portfolio in a locked cabinet behind the founder's portrait. Hazel's torn bridge drawing lay on top. Beneath it were 23 original projects, each bearing the name of a child North Star had publicly credited to someone else. The black portfolio changed the investigation overnight. Until then, North Star could still describe Hazel's case as a family dispute involving one competition entry. 23 original projects made that explanation impossible. Each file contained a child's name, early sketches, teacher notes, and a later version credited to someone better connected to the institute. The state examiners matched 9 projects to award-winning entries within the first 48 hours. 6 of the children had been rejected from North Star programs shortly after submitting their work. 4 presenting students were related to donors or board members. The remaining cases required more investigation, but the pattern was already clear. North Star had not made one mistake. It had developed a process. The board called an emergency meeting and suspended Victor, Elaine, and Camille from all administrative duties. They were forbidden to contact staff members, access school systems, or speak on behalf of the institute while the review continued. Victor ignored the last instruction. He held a press conference on the steps of North Star and claimed the portfolio had been used only to preserve student work. He said similar ideas often developed independently and accused former employees of misrepresenting ordinary educational practices. Then he blamed me. He called me a grieving mother who had turned a children's competition into a campaign against her own family. He said my parents had supported me through Aaron's death and that my accusations were the result of unresolved anger. I watched the recording once, then turned it off. His statement no longer made me doubt myself. It only showed how certain he had always been that my pain could be used to discredit me. The National Young Builders Challenge scheduled a private originality hearing for the following week. The panel wanted to review Hazel's classroom records, the paper model from the dollhouse, the torn sketchbook page, and Mason's statement. Hazel was not required to appear. Dana recommended that we submit her video instead. She has already been placed under enough pressure, Dana said. No 7-year-old should have to prove her own mind to a room full of adults. I agreed, but Hazel did not. I want to show them how it folds, she said. We were sitting at the kitchen table, with the paper model between us. She opened and closed the bridge carefully, guiding the elastic thread through the tiny holes. You do not have to convince them, I told her. I know. But Mason only knows the speech. I know why the first one fell down. That was the difference my parents had tried to hide. A child could memorize polished words, but the creator remembered the failures, the changes, and the reason every imperfect piece existed. I asked what she wanted the judges to know. That I made it before it was shiny. The hearing took place in a conference room at the State Science Center. There were no reporters, photographers, or North Star banners. The panel included 3 competition officials, an independent engineer, a child advocate, and a representative from the national sponsor. Owen brought Mason. Camille attempted to enter with them, but the advocate stopped her at the door. Because she was under investigation and had previously interfered with his interview, she was not permitted inside. Camille looked at me, as if I had arranged the rule personally. "You are turning our children against each other," she said. "They are telling the truth about what adults did. Mason may never recover from this. Then stop making him responsible for protecting you." She stepped closer. "Hazel will be known as the child who destroyed North Star." I looked through the glass door at my daughter, arranging her model on the table. "No. She will be known by her own name." Inside the room, Hazel sat beside me, while Mason sat across from us with Owen. He looked smaller without the navy jacket, the studio lights, and Camille's hand on his shoulder. The committee chair began by explaining that neither child was being judged as a person. The hearing existed only to determine who had created the original bridge design and whether adults had violated competition rules. Mason spoke first. He admitted that Camille gave him the model and told him North Star had developed it for him. He had practiced the presentation for weeks. At first, he believed Hazel had shared the idea. After seeing the bird beneath the platform, he knew it came from her sketchbook. "Why did you continue?" the chair asked gently. Mason looked at his hands. "Mom said if I stopped, Grandpa would lose the school and everybody would hate me." Owen placed a hand on his son's back. The chair asked whether Mason had created any part of the original design. "The lights," he said. "I said rescuers might need lights at night." Hazel looked at him. "That was a good idea." Mason raised his head for the first time. Then Hazel showed the panel her paper model. She explained how the bridge had to fit inside a small truck, why the center section folded inward, and where rescuers could wait beneath the span. When the engineer asked why the supports were triangular, she described the crack in her first cardboard version. "I only fixed one side," she said. "Then it leaned, so I made the other side match." The engineer placed a metal weight on the polished competition model and asked Hazel where she expected stress to collect. She pointed to the inner joints without hesitation. Mason had been taught what to say about the finished bridge. Hazel understood what happened before it became finished. Nora's classroom video played next. It showed Hazel cutting the cereal box, rebuilding the failed supports, and drawing the bird beneath the platform. The automatic timestamp was nearly 2 months earlier than Mason's official submission. The judges then examined the torn page found inside Elaine's portfolio. Its ragged edge matched the remaining fibers in Hazel's sketchbook. No one needed to ask another question. The committee left the room for 20 minutes. During the break, Mason approached Hazel. "I am sorry," he said. She held the paper bridge against her chest. "Did you throw away the first one?" "No, Grandma took it." "Were you scared?" He nodded. "So was I." There was no dramatic forgiveness, and no promise that everything would return to normal. They were two children trying to understand damage created by people they trusted. When the panel returned, the chair announced that Mason's winner status had been permanently revoked. North Star's entry was disqualified for false attribution, adult interference, and submission of work created by another child. Then she turned toward Hazel. "The committee recognizes you as the original designer of the fold bridge. The scholarship and national award will be transferred to you after the sponsor completes its ethics review." Hazel looked at me instead of the judges. "Can Mason still enter next year with his own idea?" The chair smiled gently. "Yes, if he creates and documents it himself." Mason began crying, not because he had lost the trophy, but because someone had finally separated losing a lie from losing his future. The sponsor's representative asked to speak privately with Dana and me after the children left. She placed a document on the table bearing North Star's logo. It was a preliminary commercial agreement with a disaster relief manufacturer. North Star had offered the fold bridge concept for further development and public licensing. The institute expected to receive a large consulting fee, national sponsorship, and ownership credit. The agreement listed Mason as the youth inventor. Camille was named program director. Victor and Elaine were listed as executive creators. Hazel's name appeared nowhere. The representative explained that the company had already prepared a public announcement. North Star had planned to reveal the partnership during its annual funding gala, using Mason's competition victory as proof that the institute could transform gifted children into nationally recognized innovators. My parents had not stolen the bridge only to win a trophy. They intended to build North Star's next expansion around it. Dana turned to the final page and found the section describing the project's development history. North Star claimed the design had been created entirely within its private innovation program. Attached to the agreement was a parental consent form, authorizing commercial use of all related material. My name had been signed beneath it. The signature was dated 3 weeks after I filed the competition challenge. The forged consent form changed the case from false attribution to deliberate fraud. Dana asked the manufacturer to suspend the fold bridge agreement before North Star could receive any payment or transfer the design to another company. The manufacturer agreed within hours. Its legal department also preserved every email, draft contract, and recorded meeting connected to the project. The signature beneath the agreement looked almost perfect. It had the same long curve in the first letter of my name, and the same slight break between my first and last name. Whoever copied it had access to a document I had signed by hand. I searched my files at home, trying to identify the source. Most of my recent forms had been completed electronically. The copied signature came from something older, written during a period when I signed papers without studying every page because I could barely think clearly. Dana found the answer before I did. The signature matched a family authorization form completed after Aaron's funeral. Elaine had offered to help organize insurance documents, school records, and temporary care instructions while I was grieving. I had signed one page allowing her to collect Hazel from preschool if I became unavailable. Someone had scanned that signature, removed it from the original page, and reused it on several North Star forms. The first false consent form was created 11 days after Aaron's funeral. I sat in Dana's office with the documents spread across the table. For years I had blamed myself for not remembering what I had agreed to during that period. My parents had encouraged that uncertainty. Whenever I questioned a form, Elaine reminded me that grief affected memory and insisted she had handled things because I was incapable of doing so. They had not merely taken advantage of my grief once. They had preserved a piece of it and used it whenever they needed my permission. Dana placed the latest commercial agreement beside the old preschool authorization. This signature was used after you filed the competition challenge. No one can call that an administrative misunderstanding. The state investigator requested access to the computers assigned to Victor, Elaine, and Camille. North Star's temporary board approved the search despite my father's objections. A forensic team recovered document templates containing my signature, along with signatures belonging to at least 6 other parents. Several files had names, such as approval backup and guardian replacement. The system was designed for situations in which a parent refused consent or failed to respond quickly enough. Victor claimed he knew nothing about the templates. Elaine said staff members sometimes prepared documents in advance to help busy families. Camille insisted the commercial form had been sent to me and returned through the normal process. The access records contradicted all 3 of them. The false agreement had been created on Camille's computer. Elaine's administrator account had inserted my signature. Victor had approved the document 14 minutes later. They had acted together after they knew I was challenging the bridge entry. North Star's board canceled the annual funding gala and announced that all commercial partnerships would remain frozen during the investigation. The announcement did not mention my family by name, but everyone understood who had lost control. Camille responded by releasing another public statement. She claimed the board had surrendered to outside pressure and described the investigation as an attack on educational innovation. She said parents often misunderstood consent forms and warned that strict ownership rules would prevent schools from improving student ideas. This time, the response was different. Denise Navarro posted photographs of Eli's irrigation timer beside the award-winning version credited to a donor's daughter. The twins' family released dated sketches of the tactile medicine labels. 2 former North Star teachers described being ordered to remove children's names before projects entered the development library. The discussion was no longer about whether Hazel had copied Mason or Mason had copied Hazel. People were asking how many children North Star had erased. My parents still believed they could contain the damage if they separated me from the other families. Victor came to my house 2 days later. I saw him through the front window, standing beside Elaine with a folder beneath his arm. Dana had advised me not to meet them alone, so Owen came over and waited in the kitchen while Hazel worked upstairs. I opened the door but did not invite them inside. Victor said they wanted to resolve the dispute privately. He offered Hazel the full competition scholarship, public credit as the bridge's original creator, and a place in any North Star program she chose. In return, I had to withdraw my institutional complaint, stop cooperating with the other families, and sign a statement declaring that the consent forms resulted from confusion during my grief. "You forged my name after I filed the complaint," I said. Elaine lowered her voice. "We were trying to protect a partnership that could have helped thousands of people. You were trying to sell Hazel's work before she could reclaim it. The bridge would never have reached a manufacturer without North Star. That does not make it yours." Victor opened the folder. Inside was a settlement agreement and a confidentiality clause. If I signed, North Star would avoid a public hearing, and my parents would resign quietly after a transition period. They still expected to choose the shape of their own consequences. "What happens to Eli and the other children?" I asked. "This agreement concerns Hazel. The system concerns all of them." Victor's expression hardened. "You are willing to destroy an institution because you want revenge for your childhood." I looked at the settlement pages. 26 years earlier, he had taken my drawing and built a story around Camille. Now he wanted me to accept money and help preserve that story for another generation. "I am not destroying North Star," I said. "I am refusing to help you hide what you did there." Elaine reached for my hand. I stepped back. She began crying and said, "The family had already lost enough. Camille might lose her career. Mason had moved in with Owen. Victor had been removed from the school he built." She asked whether I truly wanted Hazel to grow up, knowing her mother had ruined her grandparents. I had heard the same threat through different words all my life. Love would be withdrawn if I refused to protect them from the consequences of their own actions. "Hazel already knows what you did," I said. "What she will remember is whether I made her apologize for telling the truth." Victor left the settlement folder on the porch. I handed it to Dana without opening it again. That evening, Hazel asked why Grandma had been crying. I told her they wanted me to stop the investigation. "Are you going to?" she asked. "No." "Will they stop loving us?" I sat beside her on the stairs. "People who love you may feel angry when you set a boundary, but real love does not require you to surrender your name or your work." Hazel considered that, then asked whether she could write her name on the paper bridge. She had avoided doing so since the competition dispute began. I brought her a blue pen. She wrote Hazel Mercer across the underside of the model, slowly shaping every letter. The name was uneven, but she did not erase it. The following morning, Dana received notice that North Star's board would hold a public ethics hearing. Families whose projects appeared in the Black portfolio could present evidence. Victor, Elaine, and Camille would be required to answer questions under oath before the board decided whether to refer the case for criminal prosecution. My parents immediately tried to prevent the hearing. Investigators discovered that Victor had authorized the transfer of North Star's remaining cash reserves into a newly created educational foundation. The foundation's directors were Victor, Elaine, and Camille. Its address matched a private office rented by my sister, 2 days after the Black portfolio was found. They were preparing to move the money, donor list, and commercial contacts into a new organization before the board could remove them permanently. The transfer had not been completed. The bank froze it after receiving the preservation order. During the search of Camille's office, investigators recovered a deleted email sent to my parents the night before Hazel's birthday. Camille wrote that the competition committee might suspend Mason's award if I submitted the classroom video. She recommended humiliating Hazel publicly so relatives and sponsors would see her as a jealous child seeking attention. Elaine replied that she had already prepared the pencil. Victor added one final instruction. Make sure everyone laughs. Leah always retreats when the room turns against her. I read the email twice. The silver box, the photographer, the relatives gathered around the television, and the words about Hazel having no future had all been planned. They had not lost control of a joke. They had staged my daughter's humiliation because they believed shame would silence me. At the bottom of the email chain was a scheduled message Camille intended to release after the birthday party. It accused Hazel of inventing the ownership dispute because she could not handle Mason's success. The message had never been posted because the competition suspended the award first. Dana added the email to the evidence for the public hearing. For the first time, the board would not only see what my family had stolen, they would see exactly how far 3 adults had been willing to go to convince a 7-year-old that she did not deserve to be believed. The public ethics hearing began at 9 on Monday morning inside North Star's main auditorium. It was the same room where my parents had accepted awards, welcomed donors, and promised families that every child's talent would be seen. This time, the North Star logo had been removed from the stage. A long table faced the audience. 5 temporary board members sat beside an independent ethics officer and a representative from the state education department. Victor, Elaine, and Camille occupied the opposite side with their attorneys. None of them looked at me when Hazel and I entered. Dana had advised me to leave Hazel at home, but my daughter had asked to attend the opening. She wanted to see her drawing returned to her name. I agreed on the condition that she could leave the moment she felt uncomfortable. Nora sat beside us. Owen and Mason took seats several rows behind. Denise Navarro arrived carrying Eli's storage box. Other families filled the room quietly, each holding the kind of evidence my parents had once assumed no one would preserve. The ethics officer began by explaining that the hearing concerned 3 questions: whether North Star had falsely reassigned student work, whether administrators had forged parental consent, and whether institute funds had been moved to avoid board oversight. Victor's attorney spoke first. He described North Star as a respected institution that had helped thousands of children. He said mistakes in attribution could occur when teachers, mentors, and students developed ideas together. He insisted the development library was a normal educational archive and argued that the public had misunderstood internal records. Then he called my complaint a personal family conflict. Victor finally looked at me. For years, that look had been enough to make me question whether I had gone too far. At the hearing, it only reminded me how many children had stood alone before adults who carried his authority. Dana did not begin with Hazel's bridge. She began with the consent forms. A technology examiner showed the board how my signature had been copied from an old preschool authorization and inserted into North Star documents. Access logs connected the files to Camille's computer, Elaine's administrator account, and Victor's final approval. Camille's attorney claims staff members may have used a standard signature template without realizing the permission had expired. The examiner opened the commercial agreement for the fold bridge. This form was created after Mrs. Mercer formally disputed North Star's ownership, he said. The person who prepared it knew she had refused consent. The room became silent. Dana then introduced 5 additional forms bearing signatures copied from unrelated family records. One belonged to Denise. Another belonged to the mother of the twins who designed the medicine labels. The pattern removed any possibility of accident. Elaine leaned toward her attorney and whispered quickly. Victor remained still. Camille stared at the table as though the documents belonged to someone else. Denise testified next. She showed photographs of Eli building the irrigation timer in their backyard. She produced receipts for the original components and a North Star rejection letter stating that the design had no practical value. Then the board displayed the later award entry credited to a donor's daughter. The internal file name still contained Eli's initials. When my son saw the competition announcement, he believed he had copied someone else, Denise said. He stopped building because North Star convinced him his own idea had never been his. Her voice shook only once. "You did not lose a project," she told Victor. "You took away the part of him that believed he could create one." Other families followed. Their stories differed in detail but not in structure. A child submitted an idea. North Star rejected the child. The project moved into a private file. Months later, a more marketable student received public credit. My parents' attorneys repeatedly argued that the institute had improved the original work. The ethics officer finally asked the question they kept avoiding. Does improving a child's design give North Star the right to erase the child's name? No one answered. After lunch, the hearing turned to Hazel's bridge. Nora presented the classroom portal. The board watched Hazel build the cereal box model, test it, fail, and rebuild it. The automatic timestamp appeared beside every photograph and video. The independent engineer explained that the competition model preserved several unusual choices from Hazel's early version, including the uneven reinforcement created after the first support cracked. Those details were not standard features. They documented the path of one child, solving a specific problem. The torn page from Hazel's sketchbook was placed beneath a document camera. The damaged edge matched the fibers remaining near the binding. Then Dana played Mason's hidden video. On the screen, Elaine held the stolen drawing, while Camille replaced Hazel's label with Mason's name. Mason's recorded voice asked what would happen if Hazel wanted the bridge back. Camille answered that Hazel knew who had the better chance of winning. Camille closed her eyes. Her attorney asked that the video be excluded because it had been recorded by a minor without permission. The ethics officer ruled that the hearing was administrative rather than criminal and allowed the board to consider it alongside the other preserved records. Mason had chosen to submit a written statement instead of speaking publicly. The child advocate read it for him. He said he had believed the bridge came from North Star until he saw Hazel's bird. He admitted continuing with the presentation because Camille told him the family and school would collapse if he refused. His final sentence was the only part that made Hazel reach for my hand. "I am sorry Hazel lost her name, so I could wear mine on her bridge." Hazel squeezed my fingers but did not cry. The board then reviewed the email, written before her birthday. Camille had recommended making Hazel look jealous. Elaine confirmed that she had prepared the pencil. Victor instructed them to make sure the room laughed because he believed I would retreat when everyone turned against me. The audience reacted before the message had finished appearing on the screen. Some people gasped. Others whispered angrily. One board member removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Elaine finally spoke without waiting for her attorney. "It was meant to stop Leah from making a public accusation before we understood the facts." "You had the original drawing," the ethics officer said. "What fact remained unclear?" Elaine looked toward Hazel. "My daughter sat upright beside me, wearing the same blue dress she had worn at her birthday. I had asked whether she wanted something different. She said no. She wanted them to see that she was still the same child they had laughed at." Victor requested permission to address the board. He stood and said North Star had grown beyond any single project or family. He admitted that some administrative choices had been poorly handled, but argued that destroying the institution would punish children who had done nothing wrong. He spoke about scholarships, community workshops, jobs, and donors. He used every person who depended on North Star as a shield. The ethics officer waited until he finished. "No one is considering closing the institute today," she said. "We are considering whether you should ever control it again." Victor's expression changed. For the first time, he seemed to understand that North Star might survive without him. He had always treated himself and the institution as the same thing. The board was separating them. The financial examiner presented the attempted transfer of North Star's cash reserves into the new foundation controlled by my parents and Camille. Bank records showed the transfer had been approved after they were suspended. Victor claimed it was an emergency continuity plan. The examiner displayed an email in which Camille described the foundation as a way to preserve donor contacts, commercial opportunities, and the North Star method if the board removed them. "The method," the ethics officer repeated. "Is that what you call it?" Camille finally looked up. She said she had spent her life protecting what the family built. She claimed North Star's work required polished representatives because donors would not support ideas they could not understand. Some children, she argued, created promising concepts, but lacked the ability to carry them into the world. Hazel whispered beside me. They could have taught us. The microphone near our table caught her voice. Everyone turned. Hazel looked frightened, but she continued. They could have helped us explain. They did not have to give our things to somebody else. No attorney had prepared that answer. No adult could have said it more clearly. North Star had claimed it was helping children reach their potential. In reality, it had decided which children were worth teaching and which were easier to replace. The board recessed for 90 minutes. Hazel left with Nora before the decision. She had done enough. I stayed with Dana while reporters gathered outside and families waited in the hallway. When the board returned, the chair read the findings slowly. Victor, Elaine, and Camille had violated North Star's ethics policy, student ownership rules, financial safeguards, and parental consent requirements. They were permanently removed from all positions and barred from serving as directors, advisors, or contractors. The attempted fund transfer was canceled. The new foundation was dissolved before it could operate. All commercial agreements involving disputed student work were voided. North Star would remain open under independent management. Its development library would be reviewed project by project. Every affected child would receive the opportunity to reclaim authorship, compensation, and public credit. The board referred the forged documents and attempted transfer to the State Attorney General for criminal review. Victor did not move. Elaine began crying. Camille's attorney placed a hand on her arm, but she pulled away and turned toward me. You got what you wanted. I looked at the families behind me, each holding evidence of a child who had been told not to believe in their own work. No, I said. They got back what belonged to them. Outside the auditorium, reporters surrounded the entrance. Dana led me through a side corridor, but Victor was waiting near the staff exit. His face looked older than it had that morning. Leah, help me save what is left. I stopped several feet away. North Star is being saved. Not like this. Without you, I said, is not the same as destroyed. He had no answer. My phone rang as I reached the parking lot. It was Nora. She told me Hazel had returned to class and asked for a clean sheet of paper. At the top, she had written her name in large blue letters. Beneath it, she had begun drawing a new bridge. 3 months after the hearing, the State Attorney General announced formal charges against Victor, Elaine, and Camille for document fraud, misuse of charitable funds, and attempted transfer of restricted assets. The investigation did not send them to prison overnight, nor did it erase the damage they had caused. It did something more important. It forced them to answer for specific choices they had spent years disguising as family loyalty and educational judgment. Victor accepted a plea agreement that required him to repay the money used to establish the secret foundation, surrender his authority over every North Star-related organization, and serve a period of supervised probation. Elaine admitted approving false consent forms and altering student records. She was permanently barred from managing educational or charitable programs and ordered to complete community service outside any position involving children's data. Camille fought longer than either of them. She insisted she had only followed the system our parents created. The evidence showed that she had prepared false documents, planned Hazel's humiliation, and attempted to sell the bridge after knowing its true creator. She eventually lost her professional license in educational administration and was ordered to repay the consulting fees she had received from projects taken from other students. I did not attend every court appearance. Dana kept me informed, but I refused to build the rest of my life around watching my family fall. Consequences mattered. Yet I had learned that waiting for their suffering to heal us would give them control in a different form. North Star remained open under an independent board. The new director was Dr. Miriam Cole, a former public school superintendent with no connection to my family or its donors. Her first decision was to suspend every competition program until the ownership records were reviewed. The institute contacted all 23 families whose original work had been found inside the black portfolio. Some children wanted public credit. Others wanted their projects removed and never mentioned again. Several accepted compensation from a restitution fund created by selling property North Star no longer needed, including the private founder's residence my parents had used for donor events. Eli Navarro returned to his irrigation project after the regional organization corrected the award record. He did not ask to take the trophy from the girl who had presented it. Instead, he requested a joint public statement explaining that adults at North Star had reassigned the design. The donor's daughter apologized privately and admitted she had also believed the institute owned the idea. Denise sent me a photograph of Eli testing a new version in their backyard. Beneath it, she wrote that he had started building again. That message mattered more to me than the headlines. Mason moved in with Owen for the remainder of the school year. Camille was allowed supervised visits, but she could no longer use him in interviews, advertisements, or public statements. At first, he avoided Hazel because he was ashamed. I did not force them together. Several weeks later, a small package arrived at our house. Inside was a set of battery-powered bridge lights and a handwritten note. I really did think of these. Maybe you can use them if you want. Hazel read the note twice before attaching the lights to her latest model. She wrote Mason's name beside them in her project notebook. When I asked why, she looked surprised, because that part was his. The children understood fairness more clearly than the adults who had claimed to teach it. The National Young Builders Challenge officially recognized Hazel as the creator of the Fold Bridge. The sponsor restored the scholarship in her name, but changed the award structure after the investigation. Instead of giving the money directly to North Star, it placed the funds in an independent education account that could support Hazel's future learning without giving any institution ownership of her work. Hazel did not care about the money. She cared about the certificate. When it arrived, she placed it beside Aaron's photograph and asked whether her father would have believed she could become an engineer. He already believed you could become anything you were willing to work toward, I told her. But he would also want you to know that you are allowed to change your mind. She considered that carefully. Maybe I will be an architect and an engineer. Then you will need a very large desk. For the first time since the bridge dispute began, she laughed without checking whether anyone else approved. My parents tried to contact us after their court agreements were finalized. Elaine sent letters describing how much she missed Hazel. Victor asked for a private meeting and said he wanted to explain why he had made difficult choices to protect North Star. I did not allow them to speak directly to my daughter. I wrote one response. I told them that love without safety was not enough, and apologies without responsibility were only requests for access. They could send letters through Dana, but Hazel would decide when she was older whether she wanted to read them. Elaine replied that I was punishing them by withholding their granddaughter. I did not answer. They still believed a relationship with Hazel was something they were entitled to possess. They had not yet understood that trust belonged to the person who had been harmed. Camille's message was different. She did not apologize for the bridge at first. She wrote that losing North Star, her career, and daily life with Mason had forced her to examine how completely our parents had shaped her. She admitted that she had known the mobile classroom was mine by the time she was 16. She had never corrected the story because being the family's gifted child felt safer than asking who had been pushed aside to create that role. I kept choosing the version of myself they rewarded, she wrote. Then I taught Mason to do the same. I did not forgive her because she finally understood the pattern. Understanding was the beginning of accountability, not the end of it. I told her that any future relationship would depend on consistent change, respect for both children, and no attempt to rewrite what had happened. For once, she did not argue. The summer after Hazel's birthday, North Star invited the affected families to a reopening event. Miriam had removed the founders' portraits from the main hallway. In their place was a new exhibit called The First Draft. Every project was shown with the original child's sketches, failed attempts, corrections, an explanation of how the idea developed. No polished model appeared without the name of the person who had created the first version. Hazel agreed to display the fold bridge, but she chose the cereal box model rather than the professional one North Star had built for Mason. Beside it sat the tiny paper version from her dollhouse, with one side colored blue and the other green. The torn sketchbook page had been returned after the investigation. Hazel placed it behind glass with a new label written in her own hand. Designed by Hazel Mercer, age 7. She kept the yellow pencil on the table beneath it. Miriam asked whether displaying the pencil would be painful. Hazel shook her head. "It is only a pencil now." That answer showed me how far she had come. My parents had used the object to reduce her future to something cheap and laughable. Hazel had taken away the meaning they gave it. During the reopening, she demonstrated the bridge to younger children. When one boy struggled to explain his own project, she did not finish his sentence or move him aside. She waited until he found the words. I watched her and understood that this was the future North Star should have created from the beginning. Not a stage where adults selected the easiest child to market, but a place where children received the time and support needed to speak for themselves. That evening, after everyone left, Hazel and I returned home with the paper bridge and the pencil. She sat at the kitchen table and began drawing a large building with wide doors, quiet reading rooms, workshops, and walls covered in unfinished ideas. At the center was a studio where children could build without anyone taking their work away. "What is it?" I asked. "A school. Does it have a name?" She wrote slowly beneath the drawing. "The place for every first draft." Then she handed me the pencil. I thought she wanted me to correct the spelling, but she pointed to the bottom of the page. "You have to sign too, Mommy. You helped me get my name back." I signed beside hers. My parents had told Hazel that a child like her had no future. They were wrong because they believed a future was something powerful adults granted to the children they approved of. Hazel taught me the truth. A future begins when a child is allowed to create, fail, try again, and keep her own name on what she builds.